We continue our discussion on Unit 2 of Wealth Management, and in this particular unit, we're going to speak about the return measurements with respect to funds, uh, specifically portfolio returns management. So there are two broad methods that are used to kind of calculate portfolio returns, and these are money-weighted rate of return and time-weighted rate of return. In a way, money weighted rate of return is what we have already seen. So this is what is going to be our IRR slash XIRR calculation. The trick in understanding time weighted rate of return is to specifically try and find out what question is it trying to answer. Right. So we'll reach there when we reach there. We will first look at money weighted rate of return. It's very similar to the IRR or XIRR formula that we discussed. We can effectively construct the equation for money weighted rate of return as given. So let's assume there is this portfolio which is available where there are investments that a particular client has done over 5 years, regular investments, and then the current value is this one. Right. So under the IRR formula, you either put this as negative and everything else is positive, or everything else is negative and this is positive, and you should be able to calculate the IRR for all these set of cash flows, right? In other words, what you're saying is that you're taking 1 lakh, investing it at a certain rate for 5 years. You're taking another 1 lakh, that's this first 1 lakh. Then you're taking the second 1 lakh, investing it for a period of 4 years. Then you're taking another 1 lakh, investing it for a period of 3 years. And then 1 lakh for a period of 2 years, plus 1 lakh for a period of 1 year is going to give me 7,25,000, right? And I can solve this equation basically to arrive at this number. In other words, I can also kind of write this as 725 divided by 1 plus R 5. I divide both the sides by that, and this is 1 lakh plus 1 lakh divided by 1 plus R. So I've divided both sides by 1 plus R to the power 5. So this becomes by 5, and 1 5 cancels each other, then this is divided by 1 plus R divided by 1 plus R square, and so on and so forth. If I take this on this side, it effectively becomes the IRR formula. So that's what we are trying to calculate in this case, as to what is the exact rate of return based on this, right? And we can prove that IRR gives us this formula. We'll go to an Excel file and look at this example and try and understand it. So that's the example we have, which is what is the investment done and what are the days on which the investments are done. And let's look at calculating money weighted rate of return. So one of the ways of calculating money weighted rate of return is just put in the IRR formula and select all these together, and we get the value as 12.65%, right? We can also try and use this 12.65% to solve what we have already done, right? So we have solved an equation. We were saying 100,000 invested into 1 plus R for 5 years and 4 years and 3 years and 2 years and 1 year should give us this number. What is the rate we are investing at? This rate, 12.65%. So if I want to recheck that equation, that's 100,000 into 1 plus this rate, and I freeze this rate, raised to the power 5, correct? That's the value I get. I drag it down all the way up to here, and if I do a sum of this, I get 725, exactly the same, right? So this IRR formula has done nothing but solve this equation that we had written here. IRR formula has just solved this equation that we had written here. This is effectively money weighted rate of return. In other words, this is the rate of return someone would make if they were investing in a particular investment at periodic intervals. And whether you use IRR or XIRR, depending on regular or irregular cash flows, that's going to basically tell you what is the return on an annualized basis someone has made. Right? Remember, this is the annualized return we are talking about. So that in this case is 12.65%, and that's the return someone would have made on this investment. right? Now let's actually change the problem a little bit. That's fine if we are saying it's this investment has made 12.65% return, right? But how has the fund manager performed? So now the question we are trying to answer is not the fund's performance or the portfolio's performance, but the fund manager's performance, right? Now we will appreciate that in our previous example, if the money was invested at a time or more money was invested when markets were lower, right? Then the return would have been higher. Make sense? So if your cash flows are more when the markets are at a smaller level, your returns will be higher. However, the fund manager has got nothing to do with that, right? So if I invest more money when the stock markets have fallen, that's a decision that I have, right? Similarly, if I invest more money when the markets are higher, they have already performed well, that's a decision that I have taken, not the fund manager. And IRR basically gives the return on what I did as investments, not what the fund manager did in, right? Once I have given the money to the portfolio manager or the fund manager, they don't have a choice. They have to invest it regardless. So if I do an incorrect choice there, why should their performance suffer? So their performance measurement requires a scenario where you have to remove the impact of the cash flow. How do you do that? Right now, same scenario. You're investing 100,000 every year or 1 lakh every year to end with 7,25,000. What we also need if we are getting time weighted rate of return is year end value, right? So now look at it. What has been the return in year one? The invested amount was 1 lakh and that ended with 1,20,000, correct? Now to this 1,20,000 in year 2 we added another 1 lakh. So what was the initial amount? 1,20,000 plus this number. So that becomes 2,20,000. Now what is the return here? That's 286,000. So that's the return the fund manager generated. The fact that I put in 1 lakh has got nothing to do with what the fund manager's performance is. The fund manager got this money at the beginning of the year and he took this money to this level at the end of the year. So in time weighted rate of return, I have to basically find out the year beginning value and the year end value and look at the calculations. In this case, it is the year beginning and year end value. In reality, what you are looking at is basically values just before and after a cash flow happens, right? You want to remove the impact of the cash flow. So instead of weighting your returns with money, you're trying to weight it on time, right? So you're removing the impact of cash flows. So you're taking the portfolio value just after cash flow, and then you're looking at portfolio value just before next cash flow, right? This next cash flow can occur any time. In this case we are doing it annually, but let's say someone invests on 1st June 2013 and the next one is 11th May 2014, then you're going to find the return just on the cash flow dates essentially, right? That is where the bulk of the actual return calculation comes in, and that is what is required for time weighted rate of return, right? Now one more thing that is important in time weighted rate of return is then effectively you have to find the yearly return, and we will come back to this once we go to the Excel file. So let's look at this Excel file, and we have the time weighted rate of return calculations here, right? Now we already know what is the beginning value and the end value that's given to us, and the end value plus the 100,000 of investment gives me 220. That ends with 286 plus 1 lakh, 386, going to 488, 517 plus 1 lakh, going to 559,091 plus 1 lakh, ending with 725, right? So I now have the year beginning value. I now have the year end value. Can I calculate the yearly returns? I can do that. I can find this as is equals to this minus the beginning value and divided by the beginning value, and that gives me the number. We also will note at what's happening on the right side column in a moment, right? Now note what the equation works out to. We have arrived at this number and we have said that in year 1 there is a 20% return, in year 2 there is a 30% return, then 27 minus 5 and plus 10, right? How do we find the average is the question now, right? So let's go back to our presentation and let's try and discuss how do we really go about finding the average in this particular case, right? Now we have 20%, we have 30%, we have minus 5, and we have a couple of other numbers, right? So in effect we have 100 rupees invested, and in the first year it gives R1, in the second year it gives R2, in the third year it gives R3, in the fourth year it gives R4, fifth year it gives R5, and that's what we are equating to what is going to be the actual annualized number over 5 years. That's the equation we are effectively trying to solve, right? In other words, to find the average return, we are using what is called as the geometric mean. Now we have discussed this earlier elsewhere, but we'll rework on this, that whenever you're looking at returns on an annual basis and trying to find an average, we can't use arithmetic mean. So arithmetic mean is a no-no. Why? Let's say you start with 100 rupees. You make 100% return on this. Where do you go to? You go to 200. On 200 you make minus 50% return. Where do you go to? 100. What is the average return on arithmetic basis? 50 and minus 50 and 100 is going to give you a 25% as arithmetic mean, right? So it assumes that you're given 25% return, but you started with 100 and you ended with 100. So technically you made 0% return, right? So how does the geometric mean work? Geometric mean will say that you made a return in the first year, you made a return on that in the second year, that should be equal to the overall return squared, annualized return squared. So it's like the CAGR formula, right? You take the under root of this, 1 plus R1, 1 plus R2 is equals to 1 plus R. You take this one on the other side, right? Now in this equation we have under root of 1 plus 100% and 1 minus 50%. What is that? 2 into 0.5. What is that? 1. And from this we subtract 1, that comes as 0. That's the actual return. And that is how you calculate geometric mean. So in effect what we are going to do is whatever the number of years, we are going to take that number of years, and that is going to get equated to 1 plus R to the power 5. I'll write it again in case this is not very clear. What we are doing is 1 plus R1 into 1 plus R2 into 1 plus R3 into 1 plus R4 into 1 plus R5 is equal to the actual rated return raised to the power 5. So I remove this 5 and basically take the fifth root of this, and then we subtract 1 to get the annualized number. That number is going to be my time weighted rate of return. So remember, what we have done is we have removed the impact of the cash flows. We are now trying to find the return between dates of cash flows and then trying to annualize that return. We already have annual numbers for the 5 years. We are trying to kind of find what is going to be the geometric mean. right? Let's do that on the Excel. So we have all the 5 1 plus R1, 1 plus R2, 1 plus R3, 1 plus R4 and 1 plus R5 available with us. All that is available, correct? The product of these will give me this, that I can use the product formula, and I can take the product, raise it to the power 1 by 5, subtract 1. That tells me that the fund manager actually generated 15.6% return. But because I invested money at incorrect times, I should ideally have invested money towards the end here, because the markets gave a negative return there, and should have invested less money here. That would have given me a better IRR, correct? But because I invested it evenly spread out, that gave me a worse IRR than what the actual annualized return the fund manager gave. So the fund manager's return is not 12%. The fund managers give you a return of 15.6%. Because we chose to make investments at various points of time, we created that issue, right? Now, what we can also do is, if you want, we can just try and play around with this number a little bit. Let's say on these couple of years you did only 50,000 as investments, right? And so the year beginning value, we're doing C13 plus O12, so C13 is going to be on the left side. Let's unfreeze that, go to C13 and change it here, and let's say we increase this value here, so we do 2 lakh here, right? So effectively that becomes 2 lakh. Note that your IRR basically increases to 14.9%, right? Similarly, obviously, because the values of these numbers get changed a little bit based on what year end values are, the fund's return changes as well, right? So note that the timing of the cash flow, when the timing of the cash flow is happening, is going to be an important yardstick in deciding when a certain return is kind of calculated and how the money weighted rate of return will vary. It is important for us to understand the difference between these two, that ideally your time weighted rate of return is doing nothing but removing the impact of cash flows, right? So in other words, you use money weighted rate of return to rate your return on investment, right? And you use time weighted rate of return to get the fund manager performance. You're trying to find out what was the performance that the fund generated, right? So effectively that is the key to understanding these two rates of returns. Whenever you're looking at your portfolio, if you are an investor and you're comparing at your portfolio and you're saying that your portfolio did not do as well as the market or stock market, remember that's because you are calculating money weighted rate of return, and the fund manager does not control when you put in money or when you take out money. If you remove those impacts, then you calculate what is called as time weighted rate of return. That's what the fund manager controls, right? There is one more exercise on this that is there on the Excel file that we have just underneath it. Let's actually quickly try and do that as well. So if we go down on this, we find example 2. In this case, we have changed the data a little bit and we have said there's only one more round of investment happening, 4 lakhs coming here. Now I can directly do an IRR. It's important to put in the zeros in between, otherwise it will take those as 3 consecutive cash flows. IRR gives me 14.71%, right? Now when you look at the time weighted rate of return, you will note that year beginning value, year end value. Now year end is the same as year beginning next time because there's no investment happening. The only investment happens in year 3, at the beginning of year 4, essentially after 3 years. Is 197 getting added with 4 lakhs, 597, and then the investments come here, right? Can I calculate the yearly return? That's A minus B divided by B, and I can calculate all these 5 here. Once I've calculated all these 5, I can calculate the numbers that are available here. Based on the numbers that are available here, we get the annualized return as 19.1% on this,
right? You could play around with changing some of these set of cash flows. Your money weighted rate of return in the second example is 14.71. Your time weighted rate of return in the second example is 19.1%. Correct? That's basically the money weighted and time weighted rate of return. As we end this session, quick question. Explain what measure of return would you take for evaluating a fund manager's performance, and why is that the appropriate rate of return?